Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. Who is the most unsettling person you have ever met? Maybe a little not safe for work. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I work for a security company that brought in a replacement officer to cover a shift over the course of a week due to the explosion we had on site. Literally, it was just to guard a 20-foot hallway that had semi-active foot traffic. The dude was tall, at least 6'3", I'm 5'8" for reference, and looked like Nosferatu. He had deep, sunken cheeks, his eyes were sunken, and his skull was oddly shaped. He had long, gangly arms and hunched over all the time. I told my dad about him. We would bitch about our jobs all the time. And he said, "Wait, does he look like Details?" And I said, yes, and yes. And he said, "Holy shit, that's Mike from my high school." They knew each other, and so I brought it up to this guy, and he stood over me as I sat at my desk and stared at me for what felt like forever. Finally, he let out a long sigh and mumbled, "Yes, I knew your father. I didn't like him much." We didn't talk after that. He actually got fired from another site because he stood at the guard shack and stared at the employees intently. I made several people uncomfortable having an employee eye them like dinner. For context, I'm Brazilian and live in one of the largest cities in Brazil's south. When I was a teenager, I trained Muay Thai for almost 4 years. As it is common, I trained with some police officers, and I should add that my city is renowned for being a martial arts reference in Brazil, and maybe worldwide. One thing I should add is that police here in Brazil are pretty much divided into two branches in every state, the civil police and the military police. The first one exists primarily to investigate crimes, run precincts, enforce warrants, etc. The second one exists basically to repress and prevent criminality with force. All that said, one of the guys who trained with me was from the military police. He was from BOPE, that nice and friendly group that is portrayed in movies like Tropa de Elite and some video games. I met a lot of creepy-ass people, but this guy is, and I do not exaggerate, a psychopath. As I said, I trained for almost 4 years. When this dude started training at my academy, I was already there. I saw the way he escalated violence against his own training partners. He was a big, tall, and strong guy. And he had some creepy, disturbing tattoos. He was already scary even before he got more experienced and was well trained in Muay Thai. He beat up people badly, without any remorse. In fact, he seemed to enjoy hurting people and causing fear in pretty much everyone who trained with him. It reached a point in which I got afraid to go train because I knew that at some point I would have to spar him, and that would be a shit show. The creepiness escalated when he started to get late to training. He always said that it was because of his job. Suddenly, he started talking about people he killed on duty. He frequently had a new detailed story about someone he killed. He did not seem to realize that it sounded absolutely surreal. He didn't show any guilt. He always described everything with a chilling calm and even some pride. Fast forward some years, I stopped training Muay Thai for a long time, in great measure because of this psycho. I'm almost finished with law school. My alma mater is a public college and has programs to help poor people with law matters. I received a memo with complaints. A woman looked for our assistance because she did not have the financial resources to seek a lawyer. Her son was killed by a police officer, and no one investigated. She wanted to bring the guy to justice. Guess who this police officer was? I'll try to be succinct. I found out that this dude was expelled from the military police because he was involved in a lot of suspicious killings while on duty. As one of the judges said in one of his cases, he was involved in at least 5 known murders while on duty. He was mentally unstable to be on the police, so he was expelled right after he killed this woman's son. As far as I know, he was never arrested or condemned for any of those murders. He even moved to the USA for a while and gave Muay Thai classes. Today he lives in my city and trains at the same academy, which is in my neighborhood. When I was in jail, I made some poor decisions. In my late teens and early 20s, I had a cellmate. This guy would strip completely naked to use the toilet. He would grind his teeth together while pacing back and forth in the cell, audibly, like nails on a chalkboard. I had been in college a bit and figured I would try and use my time to stay up on my study skills. So I found a pre-calc workbook on the work cart. I thought it was a weird thing for a county jail to pass out to. So my cellmate sees this and starts going on about how he never understood algebra and asked me to show him. I wrote 2x minus 2 on a cell wall and started explaining it to him. About 30 seconds in, he interrupts me. Says knowing algebra and learning wasn't a natural human urge like R. I proceeded to talk for an hour about how R-ing a person, I can't remember if he said person or woman, this'll matter in a sec, was a normal drive for people, and the world just didn't understand. We were released for tier time about 30 minutes after he stopped talking. I went straight to the deputy station and asked to call up the old-timer who had just come in. Nice guy. He shared his hard candy from the commissary and told me to get my life straight or end up like him. Deputies totally understood, as they would hop on the intercom and berate this guy for getting butt naked to use the toilet every day. My old cellmate attacked the new guy they put in the cell that night. To this day, I think if I had tried to stay the night, he would have tried to arm me. And I'm a big guy, 240, 6'4", and been in my share of fights. But this chubby, slick-back, curly-haired dude who was like 5'4", scared the shit out of me. Just those grinding teeth really unsettled me. A friend of mine asked me to join his band because they needed another guitar player. I was kind of a hippie-ish kid, and my friend was really into hardcore metal. Nevertheless, he told me I should come rehearse with them, so I did. We roll up to this house that looks like normal on the outside, but upon entering, it is completely dark due to the blackout curtains on every window. The feeling in the house is tense. The rest of the band is on the couch, and I soon realize they're smoking meth. Okay, not my scene, but let's do this. We go through some songs, and I can tell the guy on the drums is not happy with me. Halfway through a song, he stands up, kicks the shit out of his drum kit, and screams at me to get out of his house before he kills me. I grabbed my gear and left. My friend later apologized to me, but he also told me that that guy who had the outburst had been arrested for beating his girlfriend to death. A friend of mine in middle school had a rough life with drug-abusive parents and 3 siblings. It was in the middle of lunch one day when he came into the cafeteria, and he came out to our table and sat down. We asked why he had a guidance counselor take him to lunch. He then told us, with a straight face, that his dad had hung himself that morning. We didn't take him seriously at first, but we eventually did. He told us that we woke up and walked down to the living room and saw his dad hanging. He didn't have any identifiable emotion. He wasn't sad or anything. Then a few years later, he had to move to his grandparents and stay there for a while because his mom got back into heroin, which she too eventually committed suicide. He was really a messed up kid. He now lives with his grandmother permanently. There was this weird fat kid in my math class who slowly chewed and ate my plastic ruler. 10 years later, I saw him in the news. He murdered and dismembered his wife and all her family, both her parents and a few siblings, probably that. I had a good friend who suffered from an extreme mental illness. I would catch him having conversations with the drain in his sink and laughing at the replies. He would go through these cycles where he would become increasingly violent and unhinged, disappear for a while, and come back calm and as normal as he could be. He ended up moving to Florida, and last I heard he was a suspect in a string of murders of gay men. I was glad I knew him when he was still relatively harmless. As far as I know, he's still walking free somewhere. The most unsettling person I ever met was my doppelganger. She looked just like me. Same facial hair, same brand of sunglasses, and even wearing a t-shirt from the same music festival. Although the years were different, it knocked me for a loop, and I could tell it was freaking him out too. What? I was 18 at the time, and it was normal to get the occasional Facebook message from a stranger wanting to get to know me. I'm usually friendly about it and don't mind striking up a conversation. Well, this guy, who was somewhere in his early 30s, messaged me with normal stuff, small talk, like questions. We had plenty of mutual friends, so I never thought much of it. The more I chatted with him, the more at ease I was with maybe hanging out one day. He would talk about having some rural property with a cabin that he would stay at during hunting season. He showed me pictures of some of the bucks he had shot and extended an invitation for me to hunt on his property for the weekend. I was down with the idea, but had something come up. He began to be persistent about having me there, constantly inviting me to parties, hikes, or whatever else he could come up with. I lost interest and eventually stopped messaging him back. A couple of weeks later, it made local news headlines that he had coaxed and kidnapped a 16-year-old, took her to his cabin after drugging her, tied her up with duct tape, and AR'd her and beat the out of her repeatedly over the span of 5 days. She was beat so badly that she had to undergo a partial facial reconstruction. Talk about dodging a bullet. TLDR. The guy on Facebook I was talking to kept inviting me to his property. I stopped talking to said guy because I lost interest. I found out a couple of weeks later they had repeatedly AR'd and beaten a 16-year-old girl he had kidnapped and tied down in his cabin. Way back in middle school in grade 7, we were 11 and 12 years old at the time, the guitar teacher decided the class should play password. Basically, you have 2 students stand in front of the class, facing away from the whiteboard, and the class is split into 2 teams. They have to give the students at the front clues as to what the word is written on the board, and the 2 students at the front have to guess the word. So they play a few rounds, and then the teacher is like, "Oh, I've got one." The teacher writes R on the whiteboard behind the students and says the clue is every man's dream and every woman's worst nightmare. Yeah, he was immediately fired after that. I climbed Mount Fuji with a friend and some dudes from my shared house joined. We were like, sure. He was basically drooling on himself while sleeping on the bus. He said he was meditating. He had one of those cheap, large plastic badges you can do yourself with some color-faded laser printer picture in it. During the climb, he kept exchanging it was another one in order to not drain the energy. He was pointing at the fading colors and saying, "See, it's already quite tired." He had to stop at some point and started getting emotional for some reason. He later explained that it was because what he didn't tell us was that he had climbed Mount Fuji before and was overwhelmed with emotions. It turns out he climbed it, quote, in his dreams before. Oh, right. At the summit, after sunrise, we gathered around the warm, cold pits the restaurants have. He put his banana peel on top of one, claiming it would have a pleasant smell of bananas. I didn't have time to convince him to remove it, so we got kicked out. Right before doing that, he claimed he was planning on overstaying his visa and living in Japan without papers. People around us were like, but the best of the best. After climbing down, we stopped at a restaurant to have ramen early in the morning. He didn't take anything but a small bowl of rice. When we started eating, he began breathing in and out very heavily with his eyes closed. My friend and I looked at each other like, what now? After a couple of minutes, he stopped and said he only needed a small bowl of rice because he just ate air and he was already pretty full. Legend. Probably the guy who kept misunderstanding when I said I wasn't into him and that frankly I wanted him to get his hands off my belt. He'd set himself up on some kind of meet locals thing. After leaving for college for a year, I realized I had no friends when I came back home, so I tried to hang out with him. It didn't quite work out, but hey, I figured it was worth the effort. I invited him over to my place one day to watch and riff on bad movies. He took it more as an invitation to try and get into my pants. I wasn't interested in more ways than one. He didn't seem to care. I had to threaten to call the security guard on him to get him to go. Later I found out from a mutual acquaintance that he had considered me hideous, but that he wanted to get in my pants because he collected V-cards for a competition with other guys. Effed up shit, guys. And I'm a dude. I mean, all the people described in today's video in one way or another are horrible, if not just straight up murderers, but This guy is probably more annoying than anything, but I get it, and I've known a few people like that no matter what you say, it's like they don't even hear it. They just barrel straight ahead. Ugh. There was a slightly weird kid in college, but we seemed to have similar interests in gaming and a few other hobbies, thus we both hung out a few times. We even turned out to have the same unique and very odd tattoo idea. We were hanging out one night in his room, which had literally no lights on, and talking about just random shit and weird internet shit. I'd never been to his room before, but it was effing weird, somehow dark and light simultaneously. Then out of nowhere, he started talking about gore videos, and I said I had no interest in seeing 3 guys, 1 hammer. I mentioned that it seemed senseless and messed up. He then told me his neighbor's dog wouldn't shut up once, so he ground up beer bottles and put them in the dog's food. He began laughing at that. I was rather horrified. Then he proceeded to turn on 3 guys, 1 hammer while I was still in a stunned silence, and he started watching it and laughing even more at that. As far as I know, he hasn't turned into a serial killer yet, but I seriously feel like it's a matter of when as opposed to if. The upside is that he showed me some gameplay of Guild Wars 2, and that's a pretty sweet game. A customer came in who happened to be an old friend of my coworker. They were catching up while I stood by and I overheard their conversation. This guy, the customer, told my coworker that he had joined the Marines. This was while the Iraq War was recent. My coworker joked, been killing folks? The customer then went on to say, yeah, he had loved it. He then told the story of killing someone in self-defense before he joined the military, and that it gave him the biggest adrenaline rush of his life, and he signed up so he could relive that feeling. After he left, my coworker turned to me and said, well, he's certainly changed a lot. My grandma's neighbor. I've been helping take care of her health, which has declined over the years. The neighbor's 30-year-old son would come over and be aggressive and accuse us of sending voices into his head and making him insane. There are plenty of other things he came over and accused us of that were concerning, and each time he was more erratic and aggressive. We were really upset because we knew he needed help and no one would listen, and the police couldn't prove he was unstable. We were very concerned and unsettled. He was just arrested for attempted murder this week, not towards anyone in the neighborhood though. My father-in-law lived in Renton and worked for a trucking company, and one of the guys he worked with gave him very creepy vibes. Every day for a year, he would walk into the same store to purchase coffee before hitting the road, and this guy was always there. He always made a point to talk with my father-in-law, and after a while, he said he wasn't creepy, just odd. A couple of years later, he saw the guy's picture on TV. It just so happened to be Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer.